Hello Legends. What's going on? I'm back with another new video on best Apex Legends settings. It will be a complete guide to setting up your Apex Legends to get the best performance. In this video, we are going to discuss on system requirements for running, minimum system requirements, recommended settings, what is the right PC for this game, remove the FPS cap, and video reflex, gameplay settings, accessibility settings, advanced video settings, mouse and keyboard settings, sensitivities. Apex Legends has come a long way since its launch. If you've not taken the time to change around your settings since release, your frame rate might have started to suffer. Using the best Apex Legends settings for Season 10 will help you stay ahead of the curve. A better frames per second rate means a quicker reaction time, more awareness of what is happening, and an edge over your competitors. If you want to improve at Apex Legends, you need to make sure you're using the best Apex Legends settings for 2021. It isn't just frames per second where they give an improvement. You can overall get a much easier time playing the game if you're using the right setup. While your gameplay style might vary, depending on which legend you're playing as, using the right Apex Legends settings is going to give you an advantage with any character. No matter where they are in the Apex Legends tier list, there's an improvement with better settings. To properly optimize everything, you need to look at both your in-game settings and those of your PC in general. This guide covers some recommendations for the best Apex Legends settings for Season 10. System requirements for running the best Apex Legends settings. Minimum system requirements. CPU. Intel Core i3-6300, 3.8 GHz, or AMD FX 4350, 4.2 GHz quad-core processor. GPU. NVIDIA GeForce GT 640, or Radeon HD 7730. RAM. 6 GB. Operating system. Windows 7. HDD. 22 GB of free space. Those are the minimum requirements. However, if you want to run the best Apex Legends settings in 2021 without having to make a pretty big sacrifice on the visuals, you might need something stronger. Recommended settings. CPU, Intel i5, 3570K, or equivalent. GPU, NVIDIA GeForce GTX 970, or AMD Radeon R9, 290. RAM, 8 GB. OS, Windows 7. HDD, 22 GB available space required. If your system matches these requirements, then your computer can run the best Apex Legends settings. Improvements over these specs never hurt though. Running the game at a high frame rate usually comes at the expense of graphical fidelity. If you want to manage both a high FPS and a really pretty looking game, you'll need a pretty powerful setup. There are some other things you consider about your PC, too though before getting into the best Apex Legends settings for PC. Using the right PC to run the best Apex Legends settings. There are some things completely outside of the game that you can do to improve the performance on Apex Legends. These are steps you should take to ensure the best Apex Legends settings in Season 8 can work as well as possible on your PC. Close other programs that are running when playing the game. Free up more space on your hard drive. Use an SSD instead of HDD where possible. Make sure everything is up to date for your software and OS. Use a wired internet connection. If you're using a laptop, switch it to the high performance mode and make sure the power is connected. Ensure your energy-saving preferences aren't having an impact on performance. Enable performance mode on any CPU or GPU controllers that are available for your hardware. Remove the FPS cap for Apex Legends. Before you optimize your game to run the best Apex Legends settings 2021, you'll need to fiddle with the game itself. You need to remove the FPS cap that is automatically running in the game to make sure you can get as high a rate as possible. This is how you do it. Find Apex Legends in your library. Right-click and select Game Properties. Head into Advanced Launch Options. Go to Command Line Arguments, and write +FPS Max Unlimited, and Video Reflex for Apex Legends. One quick way to see a big improvement to your Apex Legends performance is to use Video Reflex where it's available. This technology takes care of optimizing your GPU and CPU by itself. It can save you a lot of time if you're looking to improve performance without messing with every single setting. Video Reflex can work great with Apex Legends. Make sure you've got this enabled wherever it is possible. The best Apex Legends settings for 2021. Configuring your PC to run the game as well as it possibly can is just a first step. You're going to see some big improvements once you configure your in-game settings to run at peak efficiency too. Using these best Apex Legends settings for Season 10 will give you better performance, which will ensure you can play Apex at the same FPS as the pros. You might have to sacrifice some visual details, but your FPS is unlikely to dip. How much visual details you have to bypass to improve competitive performance is down to how powerful your PC is. A better PC can handle a high FPS and high quality. However, for many you might have to tone it down a little. These are some general recommendations with the competitive output in mind. The best Apex Legends settings Season 10. Gameplay settings. The gameplay portion of the best Apex Legends settings isn't going to make the most difference for the end result of performance. These largely deal with your personal preferences and little interactive points. However, these are some general recommendations for this section of the best Season 10 Apex settings. Interact prompt style. Compact. Button hints. Not necessary, unless you don't remember the buttons for some reason. Crosshair damage feedback. This is a personal preference. On gives you better feedback, off is less cluttered. Damage numbers. This is important feedback for how your shots are hitting, and where you currently stand in terms of damage thrown dealt. Ping opacity. Default. Obituaries. This is personal preference really. Minimum rotation. Most players know the map well enough to not need this, and it can become disorientating. However, it can save a few seconds of your time when checking the map, so this is open to what is easier for you. Weapon auto cycle on empty. This is just another click saving measure, but it can select the wrong weapon sometimes, so don't use it unless you're used to how it works. Auto sprint. Off, to give you the opportunity to move slower if you want. Double tap sprint. This is just preference really. Incoming damage feedback. This doesn't really make much of a difference. Take damage close as default menu. Off, so you can still swap things in firefights. Streamer mode. You don't need this on unless you're streaming of course. Usage sharing. This isn't really important for performance, so it is a personal preference. Accessibility settings. The best Apex Legends settings cover most of what you need in the game. However, accessibility options are pretty much just for if you need them. There isn't a strategic advantage to turning these off or on if you need them to use them. Unless you have particular needs, which means you need adjustments, then you can probably ignore this section for now. The best Apex Legends video settings for 2021. The video and associated settings in Apex Legends Season 10 are really where things start to get interesting. The best Apex Legends video settings can control how taxing the game is to run. This has a major impact on factors of your game like how the FPS goes and how stable it is. These are some recommendations for what to use in this important category. Display mode. Full screen. Aspect ratio. This should match the native ratio of your monitor. Resolution. Go for your monitor's native ratio. Brightness. Turn this up a bit from the standard to get greater visibility. However, this partially comes down to your preference. It isn't the most important of the best Apex Legends settings. Field of view. 100 or higher. A lot of players will insist the bigger the field of view the better since you see more of the game. However, this can be disorientating for some, and not everyone has a monitor that can make this work. Experiment with this, but don't feel like you need to have it cracked up to where the game looks strange to use the best Apex Legends settings. Sprint view shake. This just causes disruption to your camera. Advanced video settings. VSync. VSync has a negative effect on your frame rate and your input lag, so it is best to keep it turned off. This is completely useless if you have a G-Sync monitor too. Adaptive resolution FPS target. This can be helpful if you don't feel like changing your settings yourself. However, if you take the time to dial back your visual settings to give you a consistent frame rate, then it becomes unnecessary. Anti-aliasing. It isn't necessary for good performance. Texture streaming budget, low medium. You can scale this to the RAM you have available, but try and keep it on the lower end to get a better performance. Texture filtering. Set this as low as possible to free up your GPU. Ambient occlusion quality, low. This has quite a big effect on your frame rate. Sun shadow coverage, low. It is a strain on your PC and adds little. Sun shadow detail, low. In-game shadows are basically your enemy when it comes to getting a good frame rate. More advanced settings. Volumetric lighting, disabled. It can have a good effect to improve your performance, but this isn't the most essential one of the best Apex Legends settings. Dynamic spot shadows. These are more settings that make the game demanding but pretty. Like the others, it is safe to be disabled. Model detail. You don't really need the extra detail on models if you're always on the move. However, it doesn't make the biggest difference for performance, so medium should be fine here. Effects detail. The detail doesn't lose much of your experience, and it puts a strain on your GPU. This is good to get set to low. Impact marks, off. Ragdolls, off. A lot of those best Apex Legends settings come down to making the game look worse. This is sadly the best way to get it to run better. The game does still look pretty good on these settings, but not as fantastic as it could. The best Apex Legends audio settings. Your audio isn't the most important part of having the best Apex Legends settings in 2021. It clearly doesn't impact the performance of your game. However, there are still benefits. Getting a better sound mix gives you a better awareness of what's going on around you. This can actually have a good impact competitively. With 3D headphones, you definitely get the benefit. These are some recommendations. Master volume. This just depends on if you want to turn the volume up and down on your PC or in-game. Sound effects volume. Have this set to high. Dialogue volume. High to mid. This is to make sure you can hear all of the important stuff in-game. Music volume. Have this set quite a bit lower than the other sounds. This will ensure you don't have vital audio information lost on your music. The other audio settings are pretty much just about chat and your personal preferences, so there is no objective best for those Apex Legends settings. Mouse and keyboard settings. The best Apex Legends settings 2021. The best Apex Legends settings for Season 10 have to deal with your sensitivities and keyboard. For keybinds, there isn't really an objective best. If you don't know where to start, you should look through what pros players use for some inspiration, and then go from there with whatever feels comfortable. These are some recommendations for the best Apex Legends settings in Season 10 for your controls. Mouse acceleration, off. This can get pretty irritating. Mouse invert, unless you're one of those people who always invert controls in the game. Lighting effects, this pretty much just comes down to your keyboard. Sensitivities. This is where it gets a little complicated. Which sensitivities are right for you will depend on how you play. When you use the same sensitivities a lot, you build muscle memory, and responding to things in-game becomes more natural. This gives you quicker response times and more accuracy. Different legends may even require different sensitivities, because of how they move. You can't build muscle memory if your movements result in different actions each time, so try to stick to some once you pick them. When you're finding the right sensitivities for Apex Legends, you should keep these things in mind. Keeping your ADS sensitivity low is better. This allows you to make precise and careful movements, so you miss a lot less. General aiming sensitivity needs to be a bit higher than ADS. However, not so much that it is difficult to control. Scope sensitivities will depend on how confident you are taking shots at a long range. These are some general recommendations for the best sensitivities to use. However, you should consider these as starting point and work from there to make sure they're right for you. Sensitivity, 1 to 5. ADS, 3 to 5. Those are the best Apex Legends settings in 2021. However, this all comes down to what works best for you. Try to play around with these and make sure that your settings are matching the power of your PC and your skill level in the game. Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and press the bell icon.